All right, that's Billy Bragg's Power in a Union. So today we're going to talk about the rise of labor unions. But before we do, I want you to solve this problem. So let's take a look at a couple slides. This is a household budget for a coal miner, the family of six. They make $420 for the father. One of his sons, 21 years old, makes $420. His son, who's 18, makes $420 a month. This is a month, and his son, who's 16, makes a buck 50. So this totals 1,410. Now their cost of living: rent is $240 a month, fuel $10, meat $200, groceries $700, clothing $80, boots, shoes, and dry goods $70, books, papers, etc. $15, life insurance $18, sickness, in case someone in the family got sick, they must have had to pay the doctor bills, and sundries, which is a kind of miscellaneous random goods. And if you look at this, okay, this is a typical, maybe a typical late 1800s budget. This came from a town in Kentucky, in the United States. And, if you look at this and do the math, they spend more than they make. And then they're not living a very extravagant life. You could look in, you're going to have to start making some cuts, but this is not a very sustainable situation. And if you look at life insurance, for example, $18, wow, why do they pay for that? Coal mining is a really expensive, really dangerous job, and so therefore, in case you get hurt or killed in a coal mine, it's important for your family to have a little bit of income should you die. But okay, so the labor, this is another one we have from, I believe this is in Ohio in the United States. Their earnings for the father was $343. The typical day's meals, we don't have the whole family's income, but we have the father's income, typical day's meals. We have breakfast, black coffee, bread and potatoes. For dinner, which is kind of like a late lunch for them, corned beef, cabbage, and potatoes. And for supper is bread, coffee, and potatoes. So this is not a real extravagant, healthy meal. And their cost of living is $84, $15 for fuel to heat the house. Meat and groceries, again, not very extravagant, $180. Clothing, boots and shoes, dry goods, $40. Random miscellaneous sundries, $20. And the total is $339. So they're living under budget. But if you think about it, if someone gets sick, or if if the father gets laid off, or there's wage cuts, they're really very precarious. They're only about $4 a month with cushion that we talked about. By going to your boss and saying, "Hey, can I have a raise?" Or worse yet, if you complain and get angry about it, you risk losing your job because you're seen as a troublemaker. So this is the only way to really voice their opinions back then, especially in an industrialized factory, is to join together. And so before we do, there's one other kind of poem that encapsulates the feeling that laborers had during the Industrial Revolution, and many still do today. And this is a poem by the American poet Langston Hughes. He says, "Workers, the bees work. Their work is taken from them. We are like the bees, but it won't last forever." So what is this poem suggesting? It's suggesting that, like the bees, the honey is taken from them. The profit that is made from the workers' effort is being taken from them, and they're just giving basically crumbs in their wages. Now, again, you could debate how true this is. You work, you get a paycheck, and if you don't like it, you get another job. But during the Industrial Revolution, there weren't a lot of options, and even today, many people, if they have a job, there's not a guarantee they're going to find another one. So what began to develop, especially in the Industrial Revolution, is workers taking action to improve. And again, what were these conditions that they were trying to fix? Well, remember from yesterday or this morning or whatever we did this lesson, we have long hours, dangerous conditions, low pay, and these low paying conditions are often in the shadow of high profits. They see the company doing well, or they see the managers or the owners living pretty large, and they're suffering to make ends meet. Kids are barefoot in the factories. So workers begin to fight for their piece of the pie. Now, without labor unions, why were industrialists able to subject their workers to such horrible conditions? Think about it. By themselves, you're on an assembly line, the division of labor. Now, you do one or two specialized tasks, your value goes down. You're pretty easily replaceable. There's lots of people looking for work or desperate for a job who would kill for your job. So for you to complain about things, they can easily just fire you. The boss can just fire you, and you can be replaced. Do it together by yourself, and they do it together by yourself. Do it together as a whole, and it's much harder to replace your entire workforce all at once. They tried to occasionally, but workers don't own property. They don't own the factory. They don't own the means of production, right? So they only have their labor to sell. And so without the property, without the means of production, the only thing they can do is offer their work. And so that's the power really is only there if they unite and say, we're not going to sell you our labor en masse, all of us. And they form labor unions. They started out as associations of workers and specialized kind of trade unions and carpenters unions and coopers unions for barrel makers, and specific skills. And eventually they go to the factory, and you have industrial unions, which are unions of all the people who work in the same factory. They would go on strike if their conditions weren't met, which would disrupt the flow of the production and the profits, and would kind of force are trying to force the owners, the employers, to sit down and negotiate with them. Sometimes when they went out on strike, the company would replace them and hire new workers who were just desperate for a job, and this created tensions among the working class. So by the 1900s, 1930s particularly, we have something called the sit-down strike, where instead of leaving the factory where you can then be replaced or you can be beaten by police, you just sit down right at the workstation and say, we're not moving. You basically occupy it, which happened. And unions, particularly the United Auto Workers in Michigan, were able to win some concessions in the 1930s. Now, let's look at the industrialist perspective. They see high wages as a limit to their profit and ability to invest and stay competitive. So what they would argue is, look, I'm running a business. I have lots of expenses, and the biggest chunk of my expense is employees and their costs. Which is the reason why we had machines in the first place, to try to eliminate the cost of labor. And so they see themselves as not as evil and greedy people, but trying to run a business and make ends meet. And workers asking for more pay is going to cut into their ability to be competitive. And if they're not competitive, they'll go out of business, and no one will have a job. So they, especially in the beginning, fought unions pretty hard. They would fire anybody who talked about organizing a union. They put them on a blacklist. They would hire private militias, which were literally just private companies that were armed and deputized, and these guys would go out and attack workers who are on strike. Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was a huge railroad tycoon in the United States, supposedly bragged that he could hire one half of the working class to go and kill the other half of the working class, meaning when workers went on strike, he could find desperate people looking for jobs to hire as a private militia and go after the workers. The other thing they would do is hire what unions called scab labor, or replacement workers, and that would therefore nullify the strike and keep things going. And they would push for government legislation that would fight unions. In the United States, there was a lot of legislation, but in England, where we're talking about, there was the Combination Acts of 1799 and 1800, which banned labor unions. It forbade combination of workers into groups, which really took a lot of the power away from workers to fight for better pay. Their argument was that it invaded on the owner's property rights. The owners have property rights; they can do what they want on their property, and that would also hurt competitiveness and hurt the ability to industrialize and modernize in Britain. They also have to remember a lot of the members of parliament were sympathetic to the owners, and in fact quite worried and fearful of the working classes and the revolutionary capabilities. We haven't talked about this yet, but in the 1780s, France just underwent a really violent, bloody revolution. So any kind of union organizing smacked of revolutionary potential, and that scared a lot of the property class. Today, we still have labor unions, although in the United States they're not as strong as they once were. But what do we have because of labor unions? Why do we care today about this stuff? Well, after years of struggle, workers, especially unionized workers, win what's called collective bargaining rights. Collective meaning all of them get together and they get to bargain for their rights with their employer. They have the right to negotiate over conditions and wages with the owners, the bosses. Full disclosure, I am in the teachers union, the Central Berkshires Educators Association, and we every so many years sit down and we collectively bargain with the school committee over conditions, wages, class sizes, hours, all that kind of stuff. In a factory, you would do the same thing if you were in a union. Most workers in the United States do not have collective bargaining rights because the union membership is an all-time low. We're at about, I think, 13% total. And if you take just the private sector, which is the non-government jobs and teachers and police, you only have about 8% of our workers in union. Good question to explore. I don't have the answer to it. Why is it so low? We can talk about that maybe in class. And in Europe, on the other hand, they do enjoy these rights because their labor force is much more unionized. Now, as the rest of the world begins to industrialize and catch up, kind of so to speak, with Europe and the United States in modernity, the workers themselves are in the early stages of unionizing efforts, and in some of these countries, it's actually quite dangerous to organize a union because they see it as a threat to their development. The countries see it as a threat to development. In the United States, one of the ongoing debates and issues with labor is what's called the right to work. In many states, if you are working in a unionized job, this school is one of them. If you're working, you have to join the union. You just have to as part of your employment, and part of your paycheck goes to union dues, which are kind of expensive. And so many people argue that you should be able to get a job without having to join a union. That's kind of almost like bullying. Others argue that no, if you work at the same place where there's a union, you benefit from their conditions and wages and the fight that the union does, so you should belong to the union. So this is the debate that's going on. It's called the right to work. So here's your question to consider: should workers have collective bargaining rights? We'll talk about that in class, and be sure to make your post on the question on the Google Classroom. We'll see you tomorrow.